Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. First time I've got to talk to you all directly, and I do appreciate the time and the effort that you've all made. You've all sat here with pens, pencils, pads, and taken the time to take notes in this case. And on behalf of Mr. Gebhardt, I just want you to know that we do appreciate that. I know it's not your job, and like Mr. Coker, I know it's taken away from your lives. And you devoted it to this. I guess my dad always told me that the right thing to do isn't always the easiest thing to do. Something he used to tell me. But it's always the right thing to do. You can say that Frankie Gebhardt has been mean. You can see that he's used racial slurs, maybe a lot of things. But what the state has to prove to you is, did he commit this murder? And what they have to prove to you is, did he commit it? They have to prove to you beyond a reasonable doubt. And no, I don't think, like Mr. Coker said, that that's an unattainable thing. I think it is attainable. I think it has not been attained in this case. Based on the evidence, and he's right. I'm going to talk about lost evidence because that's important. And that's another focus that the state's had in this case. It's an apology. They've made apologies throughout this. Well, we're sorry. This investigation was not done right in 1983, and we're sorry about that. And there was evidence lost, and we're sorry about that. And our witnesses come from the jailhouse, and we're sorry about that. That's just all we got. So they've got lots of apologies for what they couldn't prove in this case, what they didn't prove in this case. And what they didn't prove is beyond a reasonable doubt that Frankie Gebhardt committed a murder. Like I said, he's been mean, he's used racial slurs, but he's not on trial for that. And again, they can apologize all they want for missing evidence. They can apologize all they want for past investigators. We didn't do this. They didn't do this. We're so sorry. But guess whose fault that is not? It is not his fault. It is not his fault. It's their burden. It's their burden to come in here to prove it beyond a reasonable doubt. And he can't help it. He can't help that they've lost evidence. He can't help that they conducted a bad investigation. He can't help that. It's not his fault. But they're sorry for it, and they want you to know that we apologize for it. And we're sorry that we have witnesses from the jailhouse. Yes, we're sorry about that too. We're sorry that pretty much everybody apparently at the Spalding County Jail has decided that it's their free ticket out of jail because they're sitting there watching the TV. They're sitting there talking to other inmates. You heard other inmates say they had talked about it in jail. So this information is getting passed around the jail, it's circulating through, and they're watching TV. So every bit of and guards are talking as well. You heard information that's being passed by officers out at the jail. So no wonder where this information comes from. And how do you know that it's information that's being passed around? Because most of it is bad information. They're up here testifying. Well, Frankie told me that they cut off his penis and put it in. Ladies and gentlemen, there's no evidence to that. But you got people up here swearing to that and who have talked to investigators and who have sworn to that. And they're up here telling you that story. Because that's what they've heard from other inmates. That's what they believe happened. So they come up here and tell that story, and guess what? If I tell a good story, then jury's going to believe me. I've helped the DA's office out, and guess what? They're going to help me. And you can sit here all day long and tell me that, oh, we didn't have any agreement. We didn't promise him that we were going to help. We didn't promise anything like that. But you know as well as I do, these folks are sitting up on a witness stand, knowing what they're doing. They're being told, we've talked to the DA, and you've got to do something first, and then we'll talk about how we can help you. That's what's going on there, and I think you all know that that's the reason folks are coming up here doing that, because they've heard it at the jail, They come up with a story, and they're helping the DA's office out, and therefore they're helping themselves out. Ms. Broder told you in her opening statement, it was a crime scene that screamed for justice. And it was. It was a crime scene that had evidence after piece of evidence after piece of evidence that could have been taken. It was collected. It was evidence that now could have been tested, and it is now evidence that has been lost. I don't know in what world you don't put evidence, even hairs, in slides or little packages and put them in bigger boxes and put tape on them and you mark them like all of this stuff right here. They managed to do it with the evidence, with the trash that they found in the well, but they couldn't do that with any of that evidence back in 1983. That's a reasonable doubt. Again, it's not his fault. He didn't lose everything. Nobody would be praying for more evidence right now than us, than a hair that could be tested. Because you all know as well as I do, a hair could be tested. If a gray hair was found on the body at the autopsy, then that could have been tested. It could have been tested against one of his hairs. And guess who offered to give him a hair? Frankie Gebhardt. You want one of them? You want two of them? Take them. It was a crime scene that screamed for justice, but nobody listened. And nobody listened back then. Again, they're sorry for it. So are we. But again, not Frankie Gebhardt's fault. Part of their burden of proof, beyond a reasonable doubt. It can't just be explained away with, I'm sorry. I'm sorry we lost all your evidence. That's not the way this should work. And again, it's horrible. It's horrible that nobody cared. That's a sad, horrible part for me, is that a young man got killed in 1983 and nobody seemed to care. I mean, I understand that. I understand that that's bad. But that's what happened. And again, it's not Mr. Gebhardt's fault. He needed the evidence just as much as anybody to prove his innocence. But what we've got is, I guess the way I sort of broke down this case was into two parts. You've got physical evidence or items that were found in a well, and you've got people. And they started out with Jesse Gates, deputy, knew Timothy Coggins, picked him up that night. Testified he picked him up at the corner of Pool Road and Camp Creek, as I believe. He took him to the People's Choice Club around midnight. Dropped him off. You all have notes, and if I'm telling you wrong, you look back at your notes. But he picks him up, has this conversation about a brown-haired girl with hazel eyes. As you'll recall, Frankie Gebhardt's girlfriend, specifically, Agent Coleman relayed, had brown hair and blue eyes. But Mr. Gates was specific. He was very specific. His memory was very specific. He said, Tim Coggins was bragging about his girlfriend with brown hair and hazel eyes. And Agent Coleman was just as honest as he could be and told you Frankie Gebhardt's girlfriend had blue eyes. Ordinarily, that's not something I would focus on, but again, Mr. Gates was very specific about that. And they're very specific, or trying to tell you this had something to do with Frankie Gebhardt's girlfriend or whatever, her old lady at the time, and therefore that makes that a significant detail. Again, he drops him off around midnight. 12:30, I believe, was his testimony. And he says that the People's Choice Club was packed. There were people all over the place. Therefore, you can assume or figure or presume or whatever you will that the club was still going. And it's been a long time for me. I don't do that kind of thing as much, but club would normally be still going probably at 12:30. I think you can assume. So therefore, he drops him off, and like Agent Green said, he did not mention anything in his original statement in 1983 about there being any white men at the club, but supposedly saw some there that night. So obviously the People's Choice Club is still going, and we know that Timothy Coggins was there being dropped off by Jesse Gates. You can then compare that with Linda Morgan. I think her name was something else. We had it as Linda Morgan. But the lady who testified that Tim Coggins came over to her house that night at the end of the after party. And you'll remember she testified it was at the end as the after party was winding down. So we got 12:30 that Tim Coggins is dropped off at the People's Choice Club, and it is packed. It is packed and it is still going. So an after party would be something that occurred after the club. And Linda Morgan saw him there. So you're talking has to be 2, 3 o'clock in the morning at least is when she saw him. She saw him with some people in a car. And I tell you that because she was very specific about that. I saw him with some people in a car. And guess what Christopher Vaughn said? He said, oh, Frankie told me they went and picked him up at Broadway and 2nd in a truck, in a little white truck. So therefore, maybe Frankie Gebhardt don't know what went on here, or maybe Christopher Vaughn is lying. But that was Linda Morgan. Saw him in the car, has to be 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning. You heard from Mr. Coggins' sister. Said she was at the club with Timothy that night. That night, the night of the murder. He's dancing. At some point, did not know the time, a white male, big white male, tall. A tall white male with overalls, t-shirt, and a cap walks in the club. Next thing she knows, Timothy is apparently left with whoever that gentleman was. Certainly not Frankie Gebhardt, and certainly not identified as being Frankie Gebhardt. Interesting, she also told you about threats her family received after this murder. Remember her testifying that there was a bloody t-shirt sent to the house or left at the house or left on the school bus, I believe, that her dad drove. She also said a rock or brick or something was thrown into the house with the word hush or something like that. She also said that a dog was left with its head cut off at their residence. Obvious threats that were made to the Coggins family back in 1983. I think you would all agree. In thinking about that, and you put that with the fact that, remember Christopher Vaughn said in the days after the murder, Charles Carey Jr., my stepdad, got the address out of the newspaper of where Mr. Coggins lived. And I remember going over there, riding by there, going there with him. Does that strike you all as odd? Or maybe give you something such as a reasonable doubt as to whether or not Frankie Gebhardt was involved in this, or maybe somebody else completely different was involved in this? I mean, you have a man looking up the address, taking his stepson over there, and then all of a sudden threats are being left at their residence. That can be a reasonable doubt. You heard from Sammy Freeman. And I don't know Mr. Freeman well, but just from what I heard, he gave a statement back in 1983 that said nothing about Frank Gebhardt, that said nothing about Tim Coggins called me that night and said he was with Frankie, which I guess found a little odd. But he said that's what happened on the stand during this trial, but did not say that in 1983. What bothers me about most of these, or a lot of these witnesses, is that people's memories seem to be getting a lot better as the years go on. Mine's not, but theirs seems to be. People seem to be remembering a whole lot more than they did back in '83. Willard Sanders, I think perhaps one of their few non-jail witnesses, comes up here and testifies as well. Yeah, he told me that. Told me that a few days later it was 10 o'clock in the morning and we were drinking. It was 10 o'clock in the morning and we were drinking. Ladies and gentlemen, I don't know what your experience in life has been, but if you're drinking at 10 o'clock in the morning, this is probably not the first time you've had a drink. I mean, you were drinking. So I would question, and of course, none of these people tell these stories until now. Nobody's running to tell the police. Nobody's running to tell anybody back then that, oh, somebody just admitted to me about a murder. But nobody's running back then to tell the police. I don't know whether it goes to their credibility or it goes to their lack of concern. Either way, that's sad. But all of a sudden now, like I said, they're coming out of the woodwork. People remember. I apologize. If I've done anything, by the way, in this trial that has made any of you mad, I hope you won't hold it against Mr. Gebhardt. I sometimes get a little animated when I'm making a point, which my wife doesn't necessarily care for, but I hope that it hasn't made any of you mad, like I said, that you would not hold that against Mr. Gebhardt. Then you heard from Larry Peterson. He is the GBI crime scene analyst. And his job to be there on the scene in 1983 was to collect evidence for a murder. That was his job. He was there to collect evidence. He took tire impressions on the roadway in 1983. They couldn't manage to keep up with those. Guess what? Tire impressions don't need DNA. They don't have to be put under a microscope for DNA, trace evidence. You can put a tire impression up to a tire. If you can find the tire, and if you actually go look for a vehicle that has a tire you can match it to. Truck may still be around now. I don't know. Maybe a tire impression could be used to put with it. I don't know. But it's something that could have been, he didn't need DNA evidence, is what I'm saying. But they could not keep up with that. They took blood stains. There were blood stains apparently on leaves. There were blood stains on rocks, on the dirt. They took a rock, made a plaster cast of it, had some amount of what they thought was blood on it, but came back apparently inconclusive for that. And that's unfortunate because that rock's about the only thing they had left. Because the blood stains they lost. They found a sweater that they believe and they've allowed to you all that Mr. Coggins was wearing. And they lost it. Because you know what you could have gotten from that sweater? You could have gotten blood. You could have seen if there were any stab markings in the sweater. You could have seen all that. But they lost it. Found a chair leg, a table leg, whichever it was, with the duct tape wrapped around it. They lost it. They found the empty Jack Daniels bottle that you could have got fingerprints off, perhaps, but they lost it. They took soil for a vehicle comparison. If the same soil on the vehicle, maybe you could compare it to what was there, but they lost it. They took blue threads, according to Mr. Peterson. They took those for some sort of comparison that they could have made later, coulda, shoulda, woulda, but they lost it. They took hairs from the club. They took hairs from an individual who was black and hairs from an individual who was white. We know that. We know that absolutely from Mr. Peterson's testimony, and they lost them. One of them was a gray hair. You all saw a picture of Frankie Gebhardt from back there. He didn't have any gray hair that I saw. Look at the picture. You won't see. I don't believe that you will see it either. Perhaps that's who committed this murder. But we'll never know because they lost it. And ladies and gentlemen, I know you all have heard this, but I guess the point that I'm trying to make is it's lost, and this man's being tried for a murder. And so that makes this real important. That makes this real important to him. And real important to me that I get across and that you know is that they lost it. He didn't lose it. They lost it. And not these folks sitting right here. They didn't. And I'm sorry. They had to deal with it. I understand that. They didn't lose it. But somebody lost it, not Frankie Gebhardt. Mr. Peterson said they started testing DNA in 1990. Crime Lab started using DNA in 1990. So maybe if they could have kept the evidence for 7 years, maybe. Well, I don't know. Maybe in 1990 we didn't necessarily do cold cases. Well, it wasn't that cold in 1990. Maybe it wouldn't have hurt to ask. Maybe if you had had the evidence, maybe you would have had the evidence to ask, can you test this 7 years later? Not 34 or 35 years later, 7. That's all you had to do, was keep it that long. But nobody apparently cared enough to test it. We don't know when it got lost. We don't know when it got lost. Obviously, we don't know where it got lost, and apparently nobody cared. Apparently, still nobody cared in 1990. You also heard Mr. Peterson say that there was a dollar bill that was sent in for testing. It came back positive for blood. Did they ever tell you whose blood that tested positive for? Did they ever try? Did they keep it? No, the fact is they didn't keep it. It's lost. It's gone. Not Frankie Gebhardt's fault, but it's gone. Nobody can test it now. Then you heard from Rachel Thornton, GBI Crime Lab. She took a cutting from the clothes to send for DNA analysis. She took a cutting from the sheet, the jeans, the underwear. And that goes to, I guess one problem I've got is then you heard from Ashley Heen. She was the forensic biologist at the GBI. And she took a DNA profile from those cuttings. She took a DNA profile from the cutting from the jeans. The jeans that had the outturned pocket, because that's the way they were found. they had an outturned pocket, like perhaps somebody had went into a pocket to take money out of it. So they take a cutting from the clothes, Miss Thornton does. She sends them to Ashley Hinkle, who takes a DNA profile from that. She compares that. Her job at this point is to compare that DNA profile to known samples. And guess what? She had 2 known samples. She had 2 known samples to compare it to. She had Frankie Gebhardt's DNA, and she had Bill Moore's DNA. Because you'll remember one of the GBI personnel testified that when you stab somebody, your hand is likely to go down on the blade. You're likely to cut yourself in the process of stabbing. So it's not at all out of the realm of probability that there could be perpetrator DNA available at this crime scene, as well as the victim's blood and DNA. So that's what we did. We took the DNA analysis and we did a profile, and we compared it against 2 known samples, Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore. And it came back not either one of those. Not Bill Moore, not Frankie Gebhardt. And interestingly, to get those DNA samples from Frankie Gebhardt and Bill Moore, Agent Coleman had to go to a judge. Because you got to get a warrant for that. You got to get a warrant before you can just take somebody's DNA, because that's invasive. And he swore to a judge of the Superior Court that he had reasonable grounds to believe that the DNA that was found, that the DNA sample that was pulled from this item of clothing, he had probable cause to believe that it would be Frankie Gebhardt's or Bill Moore's. He had reasonable grounds and probable cause to believe it would be theirs. That's how you get a warrant. That's how you get a warrant to pull somebody's DNA. And then guess what? We come to trial. We've taken a cutting. We pulled the DNA sample. We've gotten a warrant. We got their DNA. We found out it wasn't theirs, and now all of a sudden they are incredulous. No, that was victims. That was the victim's blood. Obviously that was his blood. Well, it wasn't so obvious to them when they were doing all the other work to get there. So they believed that it could have been, and was it? Was it the victim's blood? Guess what? When you do an autopsy, you also take blood. You also take vials of blood from a victim. And you know what you do? You preserve those so that you could come back later and test that. You could have a DNA profile from that person's blood. But that wasn't done. They didn't even keep a blood match from their own victim in this case. And I'm sorry, they didn't care, but not his fault. But they couldn't test it. They could have tested it against known samples. And you could have determined whose DNA this was on the outturned pocket of Timothy Coggins' jeans. You know what else you could have done? You could have run it through a national database. We talked about that. You got a DNA profile. You put it in CODIS, is what they call it. You run it. Because most anybody that's been convicted of a crime in the last decade or two has given a DNA sample. And if you get a hit on that, then guess what? You've got the person that committed the murder. Again, we know it's not Frankie Gebhardt's DNA. We know it's not Bill Moore's DNA. Why not just put it in there? Well, we assumed it was the victim's. But you didn't assume that before. You waited till you tested Frankie and Bill. Then when you found out it wasn't theirs, then you made that assumption. That's a pretty hefty assumption. Is that a reasonable doubt? Y'all see the crime shows. They later run the DNA. and it comes back that it wasn't the person that was convicted of the crime, why not just put it in? Why not just run it through a national database of known samples? Because that's what Ms. Hinkle said you do. You compare what you got to known samples. Those are known samples. And you roll them out. But they didn't bother to do that. They won't do it. They refuse to do it. And then you heard from James Sebastian, I believe is his name, manager of the forensic biology department at the GBI. And he told you, you can go dig up wells all you want to, you can find whatever you want to in this well, but we ain't testing it. It's been there for too long. The method in which you extracted it would have killed any evidentiary value of it, so we're not even going to test it. So they didn't test it. So that leaves you all with the inferences that they want you to draw. Well, too bad we couldn't test it. And we found this little piece of knife that I want you all to look at. And look at carefully. And I want you to look at it in comparison to a penny. I want you to look at the shaft. That's the big end of that knife. That's a penny. And that's the big end of that knife. I want you all to look at that. And I want you all to decide. Is that a murder weapon, or is that an old steak knife that somebody broke, cutting a tough steak, and it's a piece of trash that was found amongst a pile of other trash? Is that what it was? Because they can't tell you it was a murder weapon. They can't tell you that it matched. Did you hear any testimony about that, by the way, of Mr. Tillman, the medical examiner who testified first? Did you hear any testimony that a knife or blade of that size would have made the wounds in Mr. Coggin's body? He did. Didn't say anything about that. Didn't say anything, did not offer, have an opinion, an expert opinion, to offer anything as to whether or not this knife was a murder weapon or whether it's just what it is. It was found amongst a bunch of garbage, a bunch of trash, a bunch of burned trash. And that's what it is. It's a piece of trash that they pulled out of Mr. Gebhardt's well from 30 years ago. And I don't know if any of you, most of you are not my age, but if you went back 30 years in your life, a few of you that may be around my age, and I'm not going to do, but if you looked, and if somebody were to pull up your garbage from 30 years ago, could you swear they wouldn't find an old broken kitchen knife in there? Would you swear to that? And would that make you guilty of a murder if other circumstances, if somebody was pointing and say, hey, he's got a knife in his well? I may very well have. Because 30 years ago, it may have been a broke. We couldn't afford good steaks, I might have broken it. It's trash, is the point I'm trying to make. It's just trash. And then we got to, found a chain. Gosh, we found a little piece of chain in his well. And then they sort of glossed over that we also found a pulley. Wonder what goes with a pulley. Perhaps a chain. And then Agent Coleman, if you'll remember, in the very last part of his testimony, also found that he had found part of a burned bucket. In a well, you have a chain, a pulley, and a piece of a bucket. Does that strike y'all as odd, or does it strike you that maybe if you were looking in a well, these are items you might find in a well? Does it strike you that a chain found amongst car parts would indicate that maybe somebody used a chain? Maybe some of you have seen people pull motors with a chain. Testimony that Frankie Gebhardt was a pulp wooder. Would it be unusual for a pulp wooder to use a chain? I don't know how many of you know about that particular business, but would it be unusual for those of you that might know? Any explanation, and they've got no test that says that this chain was used in any murder. It's just a chain. Again, a pulley, a chain, and a bucket, and a broke steak knife. And then we've got clothes. We've got clothes that were found in the wreck. We've got a t-shirt. And I've thought about this quite a bit. And I don't know the logic of the accusation, or the implicit accusation that the state's making is that Frankie took a t-shirt and put it in a well. There was a sweater at the scene that was there. They lost that, remember? There were blue jeans at the scene. So he just took a t-shirt, is what the implication then is. What kind of sense does that make? We can't match it to anything, though. We don't have any tests. I'm sorry, it's been too long. I'm sorry, DNA has degraded. You know, we're sorry. That's the stuff. What their presentation is that we're sorry. We can't do any of that. We can't test it. But remember, there were other clothes found in that well. Other old clothes found in that well that nobody has alleged belonged to the victim, in this case, Mr. Collins. They're just old clothes and an old sheet also that was found in the well. It's garbage. It was a pile of garbage. It was a pile of burned garbage that they found in the well. And not all of it was necessarily burned, but there was a significant amount of burned garbage, because when Mr. Gebhardt threw garbage in a well, he would burn it. And you wouldn't know about a lot of it, because a lot of things, once you burn them, and then, again, take your experience, mine in life has been, when you burn something and it turns to ash, and you put water on it, it disintegrates. So there would be a lot more trash had he not burned it. Then Christina Froelich, I'm not sure I'm pronouncing that last name right, but you remember, she's a crime scene person, that she went out there when they dug up the well, and she introduced to you all Mr. Gebhardt's kitchen drawer, where oddly there were a lot of knives and potato mashers and spatulas and other things that you might use in a kitchen in it. Remember, there were some butcher knives. There were some steak knives. There was a whole variety. About 60 knives, I believe, was the testimony. 63 when you count. He also had a hunting type looking knife and a pocket knife in the truck. Remember that? The little pocket knife. We even took pictures of that. I'm not really sure what for, unless we're trying to demonstrate that a 59-year-old man from Sunnyside had a couple of pocket knives or a hunting knife and a kitchen drawer full of things that you would use in a kitchen. The sum and substance of that is zero. It's zero. When you think about the evidence, it's zero. It amounts to that. And Mr. Coker, a while ago, said that criminals have been convicted on less evidence than in this case. Then it would have, I can't imagine how much less you could have when the sum total of what they found is zero. It has no evidentiary value. It's just a pile of garbage. Then you had Daniela Stewart, GBI agent. She was also, her job was to match evidence to the facts. She went out to the Spalding County Sheriff's Department. She looked for evidence. She could not find it. Again, she went over that they found a piece of a knife. Again, I'm asking you all, look at that knife. Look at that knife, compare it with that penny. And by the way, compare it to that 1989 penny that it was right next to. A 1989 penny that it was right next to when they all spit it all out of the vacuum cleaner or the big shop vac that they were using and see that it says 1989. Then she went over, they also found some shoes. Shoes which the testimony says could not be matched to anybody. Shoes which they said there were two different pairs or two different pieces of shoes. Maybe I'm not saying. Two pieces from two different shoes. One was like a kid's. One was another kind that they didn't match to anything that was a size 10. Not matched to a year. Not matched to any evidence on it. Not matched to Mr. Coggins. Not matched at all. Ladies and gentlemen, it's just some old shoes that were found in the garbage. That's what it was. And they used a lot of resources to find all that, all the trash. They used Spalding County Sheriff's Department, the Georgia Bureau of Investigation, and they hired this huge vacuum and pressure washer to come out and find a pile of trash. And finally, well, you heard from Mike Morris, who works for the investigator with the Spalding County Sheriff's Department. Trained in interview techniques. He is a certified instructor. Man is trained to get things out of people. That's what he does. And so he gets together with Agent Cole. And Todd Harris is there as well. Got 3 highly trained professional law enforcement officers there, and they got Christopher Vaughn. And they're going to use him. We're going to send him back. We're going to concoct, we're going to plan, we're going to scheme. And we're going to get Christopher Vaughn back there in the cell with Frankie Gebhardt, and we're going to record him. And we're going to get him to spend an hour and 20 minutes to try to get Frankie Gebhardt to implicate himself in this murder. Because obviously Frankie talks about it all the time, and he's talked about it so much, apparently, according to Christopher Vaughn, that we got him now. Man's got a 6th grade education. 3 highly trained law enforcement officers and the child molester get together, send Mr. Vaughn back there wired up, and we're going to get Frankie to confess. And the sum and substance that they got from this sting operation was 0. It was the same 0 they got from hydrovacing Frankie Gebhardt's well. It was a 0. And you remember Christopher Vaughn said, oh yeah, well he was talking about it yesterday. He's not talking about it today. Well, that's real convenient for Mr. Vaughn, isn't it? Isn't it real convenient that since Frankie doesn't say anything, we're going to tell you that he gave us visual signs. You could listen to an hour and 20 minutes of Frankie and Christopher Vaughn and all of them talking, but now when it breaks, well, he balled his fist up and his lips started quivering. Because they did an audio recording. So it's very convenient now. I can tell you that he was lying because he showed signs that he was lying, and I'm trained to see that. That's really convenient. And Christopher Vaughn is very convenient for him. Well, I just don't know what's wrong. He was talking about it yesterday. What he was talking about was trying to remember who found the body. Who did he say was there when he was talking yesterday. Me, my dad, Barry Sanders, Willard Garner, Keith Garner. What's in this transcript? So what Frankie was talking about when Christopher Vaughn said he was talking about it, was he was talking, trying to remember, and talking about who was there and found the body. Not anything about killing anybody, because you know he denied that throughout the entire hour and 20 minutes. And y'all all heard the lengthy concocting and scheming to try to get him to talk. And you remember Vaughn saying, just remember, I'm helping you. You got a card or something? Asking the agents. You remember Vaughn saying, I know you can't do a whole lot, but maybe you could at least tell the parole board what I've actually done. I don't mind doing it. And then you recall Christopher Vaughn saying, yeah, they damn sure asked me about a knife, whether I'd ever heard that. And Frankie Gebhardt say, and I quote, a knife? What about a knife? That's what killed the man? Didn't even know that's what was alleged to have been a murder weapon. Denied it over and over and over again. Vaughn says, I don't know who these people are. And Mr. Gebhardt says, it don't matter. I don't know nothing about it. Damn sure don't. That was an hour and 20 minutes, and you all heard he then went in immediately, almost immediately thereafter, for an hour and 6-minute interview with these highly trained law enforcement officers. And I guess I want to say this, and I don't know, and maybe I'm making an assumption, and maybe I'm making an assumption that's not based on your experience. But if 3 trained law enforcement officers, and Mr. Vaughn, who supposedly has the truth on his side, matched wits with this man with a 6th grade education, and after an hour and 20 minutes, they got nothing, then I just want to ask you all, is he so much smarter than them, or was he telling the truth? It's got to be one of those things. Either this man is smarter than all those folks and just has outwitted them all, or he's telling the truth when he says, I don't know nothing about it. And so thereafter you had the interview with Agent Coleman, with Investigator Morris, and you had an hour and 6 minutes. Hour and 6 minutes of finding out that Frankie has a 6th grade education, listening to Frankie say, I don't know a damn thing about it. During that hour and 6 minutes, we got hair. There was hair found. You want one of mine? You want 2 of mine? You want 3 of mine? I don't give a damn. I know I ain't got nothing to do with it. Then they tried to make it seem like Frankie was playing dumb. Well, I'm not trying to downplay your condition, but if you know how much dog food to give dogs and how much water to give a mule, then you must be smarter than we think you are. And Frankie says, I got a little cup. I give my mule 3 cups and I give my dogs 2. It ain't that hard. Frankie says, it's not that difficult. The man's got a 6th grade education for which they said they did not doubt. And I think by you all listening to it, you understand that that's exactly what education level that he was at. And then it was the talking about the murder. Have you talked about the murder? I don't know. I don't reckon so. I don't remember. I stayed drunk for 23 years. You all heard that testimony about the murder. Have you talked about it? Maybe it's me. Maybe you all take your own experiences. But there's a big difference between did you confess to committing a murder than did you talk about a murder. Lots of people have talked about this murder. Lots of people have talked about lots of murders. But that's the question that he's being asked, is did you talk about a murder? Okay, so you never told anybody about the murder? Not that I know of. During those years when you were drinking, as you said, was there ever a chance that you might have talked about the murder or talked to somebody about the murder? No, not that I know of. Because his friends had found the body. That's why, if Mr. Gebhardt was talking about the murder, that would explain why he would be talking about it. Again, it's just hard for me to believe that a man with a 6th grade education outwitted all these folks for almost 2.5 hours. That they tried stings, immediately followed by an hour and 6 minutes of interrogation, and he outwitted them? Or did he tell the truth? Is what happened here 34 years, 35 years of a story where Willard Sanders and Charles Carey Jr. and whoever these Garner people are and Christopher Vaughn found the body on a morning or afternoon out on Minner Road, who lived and associated with people at Carey's trailer park? Is this a story about that? Is this a story about those folks who in the months and years after, maybe something was said at a party, maybe somebody bragged, maybe somebody said something that made somebody believe that Frankie Gebhardt had something to do with this murder, and then it has been built up over a course of 34, 35 years until we're here. And until now we're making up stuff. You've got inmates coming out of the jail to make up stories. Is that what's possible? Is that a reasonable doubt? That 34, 35 years ago, a story was told, a rumor was started, somebody said that Frankie did this. Oh, you know, Frankie did this. Everybody knows it. And then people added detail as the years passed. I know I grew up over in Jackson. It's a small town. We always, maybe you all have had that experience, it was always something that somebody said, somebody did. Well, you know, they never arrested him for it. You know, we all know he did that. You know, whether it was somebody that committed suicide, but, you know, we all believe he did it. And, you know, small towns are full of that. It happens. And over the course of 34, 35 years, it can happen a lot. And it did happen. Because you've got these people who have associated with each other for that long period of time. And especially in a closed-off community like Carey's trailer park. Again, Investigator Morris testified that he talked to Terry Reed in the jail. Terry Reed told him that other law enforcement officers were giving information. Oh, they're all telling him what's going on, or telling him what's going on. Maybe they are. Between watching TV, inmates talking, and guards or officers passing information, that's how it's getting around. But they went and investigated it, and they found that Terry Reed wasn't present. So you just showed that one of your jailhouse witnesses is a liar. He will tell a lie. Because you know you can verify that kind of stuff. Because everything's recorded and videoed in that jail, and if it had happened, you could find a recording, an audio or video of what happened, and try to corroborate it or not. But you didn't hear anything about that. Said that Terry Reed said that Frankie Gebhardt told him that victim's penis was cut off, put in the mouth. Again, it's not true. So either Mr. Reed is lying or Mr. Gebhardt doesn't know what happened. And if he don't know what happened, it was because he wasn't there. Because people are making up stories. Ladies and gentlemen, that didn't happen. But that's what Mr. Reed is saying that happened. He told me that. Oh yeah, he told me what they did. So it's not true. It's not true. It's a reasonable doubt because it's not true. And you heard Mr. Sanders testify. I thought it was a drug deal. Frankie told me it was about a drug deal. But then Agent Coleman told me it was about a white girl. Huh. How did I know? I believed what Frankie told me, and then all of a sudden Agent Coleman told me, oh, it was about a white girl. I thought it was a drug deal because Frankie told me that. But apparently Frankie didn't tell him that, or I don't know what happened, because Agent Coleman then testified, I didn't tell him that. I didn't tell Willard Sanders that. I didn't tell him he's got a white girl. Well, guess what? That makes Willard Sanders' testimony a lie. If you have to put up the agent who interviewed him to tell you all that his testimony was not truthful, then that makes it a lie. And I'm not saying necessarily intentionally lie, but again, 35 years ago, you all saw Mr. Sanders 34, 35 years ago, and he's giving you a story he got at a table a few weeks after this in 1983 at 10 o'clock in the morning having beer. That's where that statement comes from. And you all judge the credibility of that statement. Because like Mr. Coker said, you all are the judges of the credibility of the witnesses in this case. You all, you judge that. You find who's credible, you find who's not. Once again, Agent Coleman said that Willard Sanders told you a lie. And I believe him that Willard Sanders told you a lie. Or something he didn't know about. Then you remember hearing from Mr. Bennett. I think as Mr. Johnston put it, is the jailhouse witness who looked about 12, nice young boy. But he said that Frankie told him, his story was, and Frankie told me that they were riding around and they heard a woman screaming and they stopped and they found that a woman was being raped. And so that was the reason for the murder, is because they found somebody raping a woman. Nobody else has told that story. You know where you can find that story at? You find that story in the mouth of Jonathan Bennett, and you can find that story probably still circling around the Spalding County Jail. I'll bet there's people out there now raising their hands, trying to get somebody's attention to try to tell that story, but that's what they heard too. That's what Frankie told me, because it's a made-up story. It's a made-up story. It's a reasonable doubt because it's a made-up story. And that's what you get when you bring in people who are dressed in street clothes but have left their striped jumpsuit right behind that door open. Because that's what they're wearing, normal. You heard Agent Coleman testify again about the brown-haired girl with the blue eyes, as opposed to Jesse Gates, who said Mr. Coggins told him about the brown-haired girl with the hazel eyes. You heard again about the knives found from the kitchen drawer. You heard about items recovered from the well that dated from the late 70s into the 2000s. Again, it's a lot of years of a lot of garbage. It's a lot of years that somebody's throwing trash into an unusable well to fill it in and then cover up because it's unused. He's got another well. Got to fill that one in. Again, Agent Coleman went over the evidence with you, told you about the shoe, the chain, the shirt, the broken knife. Again, you all look at it, decide. Wasn't tested, wasn't attempted to be tested, is not in any way associated with this particular murder, and therefore is just what it is trash. You also heard from more jailhouse witnesses. You heard from Mr. Robert Smith, who just has a great memory because he was a drinker, you know, back then. He was just a drinker. Now he's, some people might say, a meth head. He's in jail for meth. He didn't start doing that, he said, I think, for he was 44. But Mr. Smith has a memory. And I just want to ask you all this. Is adding something to a story, and there was a lot of talk about being consistent, and the stories do vary. But Robert Smith is at the jail, and he's got his hand raised like the rest of them out there. He's going, please come see me. I would like to tell y'all a story because I want some help. But he's out there wanting to talk to investigators. So they go out there knowing, and he knows what they're out there for. You coming to see me because you want to hear my story. And so he tells his story. And he tells his story about, yeah, Frankie said he admitted killing this fellow. And that was in May of 2017 that he said that. And then, from May of 17 to June of 2018, he now comes into, that was all of his story back then. Now he comes into court, and it's time for trial. And so his story is, oh yeah, Timothy Coggins was at those parties. He was at probably three of the 5 parties. Something he didn't mention in May of 2017. I don't know whether you all think that's significant or not. But if you don't, I can understand you can not remember whether you ate at McDonald's, or you can not remember whether you had an Egg McMuffin, or a McGriddle. But when you're telling a story and you volunteer and you're raising your hand wanting to tell a story about what you know about a murder, and then all of a sudden a year later you've got all these other details, then again your memory is better than mine, because your memory is getting better as the years pass. And so apparently Robert Smith says too, oh yeah, now I remember that. Yeah, he was at those parties too. Oh yeah, I remember him being chased into a trailer. He didn't say that in May of 2017 either. Oh yeah, now I remember they were butchering a cow back there too. Frankie was butchering a cow. Yeah, I remember that. So he's got all kind of new details, which amount to a reasonable doubt for you all, because those are details that are added. Those are details that are lies. Those are just made up to make the story better. Because the better the story, the more help you get. The more consideration you'll get from the DA's office. Because you got to not only come in here and testify, you got to try to get this man convicted, because that's what's producing. I got to make it happen. So he changes his story. You also heard from Mr. Douglas. You know, he's the one that was wearing the long sleeves because they didn't want y'all to see all his Hitler tattoos. You know, this is the neo-Nazi who's out there. By the way, you've also got Frankie Gebhardt, who's friends of Terry Reed, who's a black man out at the jail, and who's apparently friends with the neo-Nazi too. Apparently he gets along with everyone. Because everybody seems to talk to him, want to talk to him, or he approaches them to talk to him. I don't know. But he's a neo-Nazi. He comes in here with his long sleeves so you all can't see those nasty tattoos. And he's the house man. This is the house man out of the jail. Did that bother any of you? That this is one of the guys that's in charge of the other inmates. The neo-Nazi who said, part of my assignment is picking bunks, assigning people to bunks. Does that bother any of you? That it's a neo-Nazi who's out there doing that? Whose claim to fame is I get certain tattoos for hurting somebody of a different race. That's what he has to do. And again, you've got Mr. Vaughn, who has given interviews. He's on record as much as anybody we know. From 2007 to 2008 to 2015 to twice again in 2017. I mean, he's given a lot of interviews. And he's changed. And again, I understand about inconsistencies, but if I'm telling you about my experience, and I'm telling you about my experience about a murder, you know, here's an important part of my story right here. If I'm Christopher Vaughn, I saw Frankie Gebhardt and Timothy Coggins on the night of the murder. I didn't just find the body. I saw them the night of the murder because I was watching them from the balcony of my A-frame house that overlooks the trailer park or some odd such as that. And I was awoken by something, and I came out on the balcony, and I looked, and I saw them. I saw Frankie Gebhardt, and saw Bill Moore, and saw Frankie's old lady, and I saw Timothy Coggins the night of the murder. And they was arguing. And then I saw them get in a car, and leave and go down Middle Road. If I'm telling a story, and I have a memory of something, do you all agree with me that that's a crucial detail that you have to offer? I mean, if you're going to tell your story of Frankie Gebhardt and Timothy Coggins, that's like the most important thing you could tell. But guess what? In 2007, that's not part of his story. He didn't tell that story in 2007. He told some other story in 2007. He didn't mention seeing them the night of the murder because he was 10 years old. Keep in mind, he was 10 years old. And now, 35 years later, now he's adding to the story. Because in 2007, guess what? He gave an interview, and he told whatever it was he had to tell, and it didn't work. Because that's when he started talking. That's when he started telling his story, was after he got locked up for child molestation, for molesting children, and then he decided, hey, maybe I have a get out of jail free card. That's when he first started telling his story. And he told it in 2007, and it didn't work because he was still in jail. And he's sitting there twiddling his thumbs, and he wanted to talk to somebody else. So Agent Baby then comes down to talk to him in 2008. And he tells this little story. Don't mention anything about seeing them the night of the murder. And guess what? That story didn't work either. Well, what's he going to do? Now he's got to see sitting in jail in 09, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, until fine. I have bagged enough. Now Agent Devane will come see me. Thank God. This hadn't worked before, so guess what I've got to do now? I got to tell a better story. So now, because this one ain't working, I ain't singing loud enough, I ain't producing, I'm still in jail, something's got to give. So now, for the first time in 2015, Christopher Vaughn says, oh yeah, now from when I was 10 years old, I remember seeing them the night of the murder. I don't just remember finding a body. Oh, he's got all kind of good details now. Now he's got more to tell you. Yeah, now it's all coming back to me, because you all remember how much do you remember from when you were 10 years old. I remember playing in the woods, having dirty feet, and getting spanked by my mom and dad every once in a while. That's what I remember from 10. But I understand. It's like Miss Broder said in her opening statement. When something significant happens, she remembers what she was wearing when her daughter was born. I agree. When a significant event happens to you, you remember that. He found a body. He was with some people who found a body. I can understand that. I can understand him having a more decent memory about that. Trust me, I do. But no, what I don't understand is that he gets locked up and waits until 2015, and then he has a 10-year-old flashback of, oh yeah, I saw them the night of the murder too. I walked out on my balcony and I saw him, and there was a trailer, and it's him and him and him, and they got a car, and no, that didn't happen. That's made up. That's made up story right there. Because it didn't get him out of jail. And he's got to produce, he's got to make up a good story, because he's got to do something to get himself out of jail for molesting children. And that's what's happening here. Make no mistake, because that's what happened. That man's working for get out of jail free for molesting children. (2007). Said Frankie told me they lured him to Broadway and 2nd and took him to the utility lines. Okay. 2008. They tricked him into coming to Broadway and 2nd. They picked him up in a white Chevrolet pickup, drove around, stopped by the trailer park, he told me. Then they went to the power line. And all these times offering to assist in any way possible. 2015. Adds the critical detail that now he saw him. Now he saw him, and they were arguing. And then he sees them leaving in a car. Because apparently they had a truck, and then when they got to the trailer park, they had a car, and then when they got there, they had a truck again. It doesn't make sense. It just doesn't make sense. It's a reasonable doubt. They're trying to convict this man of murder based on this. Oh, and then 2015, he added a knife. You know the knife that Frankie said, a knife? Is that what was used? And again, he also then, that's when he first came up with his stepdad got the address of Mr. Coggins, and they went over to his apartment. And then they started, according to Ms. Coggins, then they started getting threats. 2017, he's asking for help. Can I get a concurrent rather than a consecutive sentence? Because when you get 50 years, like a 20-year sentence and a 20-year sentence and a 10-year sentence that adds up to 50, it would be better to get a concurrent sentence. Because consecutive means 50 years. Consecutive means he's getting out of jail in 2054. That's a long time. So he wants to change to concurrent sentences. Oh, and he also changed it. And in the May 2017, that's when he changed it to, well, that's when he gave a time. Now, not only did I see him, I can tell y'all what time. Because it's now 2017, we're getting close to doing something. These people seem serious. So let's throw in an added detail. When I saw them, it was 10 o'clock. It was 10 o'clock. When I saw them at the murder, it was 10 o'clock. That's in the May 2017 interview. He said 10. Now it gets to trial, and guess what? It doesn't fit that timeline anymore, because you've already heard we've committed now. Mr. Gates has dropped him off about 12. Miss Morgan has seen him 2, 3 o'clock in the morning, some odd time is that. So now that we get to trial and he gets on the stand, the time changes. Oh, well, now it's probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. It's probably about 1 o'clock in the morning. It's a big difference from 10, because guess what? It didn't fit the timeline. It didn't fit the timeline that they want to convince you of. That's a reasonable doubt. You cannot come into court to convict somebody of a murder with this. Stories that change like that. It was 10 a year ago, now it's 1. Because now we've got a different timeline. That's what they want you to convict this man of murder, is based on trash like that. It was trash when it came out of the well, and it's trash when it came out of Christopher Vaughn's mouth. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm sorry, I'll try to wrap this up. I know I've been talking a lot. Finally, you did hear from Mr. Sturgill this morning. I do want to point, this was the witness that rolled into town Friday afternoon. And this is the witness who was brought up from Florida. This is the witness who is convicted of possessing 72 pounds of methamphetamine. And I don't know what all kind of help he's going to get, because Mr. Coker was right. The state can't help him out, except for they can call the feds, who can help him out. And they can relay to the feds that you helped us out, and we can knock a little more time off Mr. Sturgill's sentence. Because, ladies and gentlemen, if y'all believe these are just good folks that are coming in here because they are just good citizens, then you don't feel the same way as I do, because they're not. They're coming in here for help. We paraded in jailhouse witnesses because they want help. That's what they did. And that's what there is to them. So Mr. Sturgill, remember, he talked to them. He came in and he met with Mr. Coker. He gave them his story. This is what happened. This is what I know about it. You know, we went through the same. Penis was cut off, and I apologize. I don't. But that's a detail, and the reason it's important is because it didn't happen. But Mr. Sturgill was passing off that trash as well. So he's here to pass that on. And ladies and gentlemen, wouldn't talk to us though. And again, I'll fall back to my dad, who would have looked at me and said that if a man's telling the truth, then he could tell it to whoever would listen to him. But why can't he tell it to us? And I'll tell you my theory on why Mr. Sturgill can't tell it to me. Because if he had told me on Friday that a deputy came out and responded to a domestic violence call out at Carey's Trailer Park and was there about to or trying to apprehend Mr. Gebhardt, then I could go back and do maybe an open records request and maybe find out if we could corroborate that story. Maybe I could go and pull records at the Spalding County Sheriff's Department, because there would be a dispatch log. Many of you would be familiar with it. There would be a call-out log. There would be something out there probably that could document whether or not that was a true story or not, or something that I could document and I could hold up in front of you now and say, that's a lie. That was a lie. So you know why he'll talk to the state and not to me? Because I could have checked it out. I at least could have had a chance. But they didn't want to tell us about it. They just wanted to tell the state, and then he could come up and tell his little story and go back to Florida with his cooperation. Because his story is, yeah, deputy came out there and was going after Frankie, and Frankie said, you do to me, I'll do what I did to so-and-so. And then the deputy turned around and left. Do you all find that story to be credible? It is not credible with any of the deputies I've known growing up that a deputy just turned around and left. Because I could have checked that story out, but didn't get a chance to. And again, that's what we're trying to use, garbage like that, to convict somebody of murder. The whole DUI story could have easily been checked out. Wish I could have known about it. I wish I could have narrowed down some times. Wish I could have narrowed down some police reports. Wish I could have narrowed down some arrest records, some court records, anything to prove that Mr. Sturgill was either telling a lie or the truth, but I couldn't do it because he's telling the truth, but he didn't want to talk to me about it because I might could have proven it wrong, but didn't get that opportunity. Again, it's just trash. And that's what those witnesses amount to. That's what all your jailhouse witnesses amount to. It's just trash. The same thing that was found in the well. Ladies and gentlemen, you've got plenty. It's reasonable doubt. Beyond the reasonable doubt is not an unattainable goal. But reasonable doubt in this case has not been attained. They ain't got there. You've got to have more than this to convict a man of committing murder. You've got to have more than a sum total of zero evidence and more than a sum total of zero credibility for witnesses that you bring into this courtroom. And that's what you've got. If you believe that this is a result of a story that got out of control over 34 years, then you have a reasonable doubt. If you believe these folks from the jail are looking to help themselves, have every motive to lie, then you've got a reasonable doubt. If you believe they've been passing this information all over that jail and watching TV and listening to what these guards are telling them, and that's where they're getting these stories from, then you have a reasonable doubt. If the fact that they all have different stories, and that those stories don't match the truth, don't match the actual facts of this case, then you have a reasonable doubt. If you believe that that knife is just a piece of garbage, then you have a reasonable doubt. Look at it, please, I beg you. It's there, next to a pen. Look at it. If you believe it's just a piece of trash, or you think that it might just be a piece of trash, then that's a reasonable doubt, and that's not guilty. If you believe that that t-shirt was just another piece of clothes that was found in a well with a bunch of other clothes, then you've got reasonable doubt. If you believe that a well has a chain, a pulley, and a bucket in it, and that's not something you might reasonably find in an old well, then that's a reasonable doubt. If you believe that's normal stuff that you would find in a well. If you believe that there's DNA that's there, could have been tested, should have been tested, still could be tested, and you run that DNA through the national database, and if you believe, for one instance, that it might come back and pop up a suspect, somebody who was there at the scene of this murder, then you have a reasonable doubt. That is a reasonable doubt. Ladies and gentlemen, I recall from opening, there was talk about atoning for sins of the past. And that struck me because I believe in doing that. You know, I believe that you do atone for sins of the past. But this is not where we do that at. We atone for sins of the past maybe in the church that we go to. Or you atone for sins of the past in the way that you treat other human beings from this point forward. Or you atone for sins of the past from your behavior from this point forward, or whatever point you decide to begin your atonement. But ladies and gentlemen, this is a court of law, and this is reasonable doubt, and this is a man charged with murder. And I understand that racial slurs came out of his mouth, and I'm not defending that. I'm not defending him being mean. I'm not defending him using racial slurs. I promise you I'm not. Because I concede, I lose. He did. And that's the bottom line there. I can't defend that. But this is not the place for atonement. This is not the place to atone for sins of the past. This is a criminal trial where the state has to prove to you guilt beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's the only issue, and that's what you all have to do. And that's why I said that I know that it's hard. I know that that's a difficult decision. I know that it's difficult to set aside somebody that uses that language. I know that it's difficult to set aside someone who's been mean, somebody who, offended you. I know that it's difficult to put that aside, but that's what your job is. That's what your duty as a juror is to listen to the law that the judge gives you, apply it to what the facts that you have that amounted to zero, and find this man not guilty. And I understand that's difficult, that you want to. You may want to convict. You may say, maybe he did have something to do with it. He may have. Maybe that's what you might say. Maybe he did. But that's not proof beyond a reasonable doubt. And that's what you would have to find is proof beyond a reasonable doubt to convict him of this murder. That's what you have to find. And it's a reasonable doubt. Like Mr. Coker said, it's a doubt based on reason and one for which a reason can be given. And ladies and gentlemen, you can give about 10 or 15. You can go back there and look at this and you can come up with about 10 or 15 reasons for reasonable doubt. If you do that, I would suggest you all look at it, look at the evidence, put the state to their burden, which they have accepted. It's beyond a reasonable doubt. And I think once you do that, you have no choice but to find Mr. Gebhardt not guilty of all of these offenses for which he's been charged. There's just a lot there. There's a lot of reasonable doubt. Not just a little, but a lot. I'm not going to get up here anymore, thankfully to you all. I don't get a chance to respond. Someone from the state will give a closing at this point. I just want you all to keep in mind that I don't have any rebuttal to that anymore. I've said what I get to say, and I guess maybe that's why I've been so emphatic as doing it. I don't get a chance to talk to you all again. I hope you all will look at it. I hope you all will think critically about what the state is telling you when they get it. I hope you'll think about it. I hope you will look at this. I hope you will consider this is this man's life over here. And what you're doing is a very serious thing, which I don't doubt that you all do understand. And I believe that after that consideration, you'll be able to find him not guilty. Thank you so much for your time.